Hey there, welcome to the Bible in 5. This video we're going to be covering the book of Chronicles. The book of Chronicles, it's split up into two parts in our Bibles, first and second, but that was just due to the length of the scroll. They needed two scrolls to fit the amount of words. So it's really just one book and one storyline. The other unique thing about the book of Chronicles is that in our English Bibles, it comes after the books of Samuel and Kings, and it's a lot of overlap with those books. You read through Samuel, Kings, and then you come to Chronicles, and you're like, wait, I already read this before. And that's because you did. A lot of it is repeat of the story of David and the kings of Israel. In the traditional Jewish order of the Bible, however, the book of Chronicles is the last book of the Bible. It's not fit into the history books, rather, it comes dead last. And there's a good reason for that. The first word of the book is the word Adam in the list of names that occurs. The last note in the book is about the return from exile. And so the book of Chronicles was intentionally written and shaped to be the last book of the Old Testament, literally summarizing from Genesis all the way through to the return of the exile. And so the book of Chronicles was written by somebody who lived way far down the line after the exile, just a few hundred years before Jesus. And it represents someone who's looking at the whole storyline of the Old Testament, and they want to write through the story again, but emphasizing key themes, and specifically the themes of the coming Messiah and the future temple. So from the perspective of somebody sitting a few hundred years after the exile, the Messiah still has not come, who's supposed to come from the line of David. And the temple was rebuilt after the exile to Babylon, but it's not the glorious temple of David and of Solomon, and it doesn't match the promises of the prophets like Isaiah that there would be a temple that would be God's dwelling place and all nations would come to it and so on. And so these are the two themes that the author uniquely highlights through retelling the story. Some of the material overlaps with the books of Samuel and Kings, but there's a lot of important differences. So Chronicles begins with 9 chapters of genealogies, of lists of names, which you might think is going to be reading them as like torture, and it kind of is. It might seem very boring to you. But what the author's doing is he's summarizing the storyline of the Old Testament by telling you all of the main characters, listing the main characters through the story. And as the author shapes the genealogies in these chapters, he highlights 2 lines within the people of Israel specifically. One is the line of Judah, which is the line that leads to David, and is the line that is going to lead to the Messiah, or at least the hope of the Messiah. So the author intentionally highlights the role of Judah coming to David and then up through the Messiah. The other line of people that the author traces is the descendants of Aaron and of the priesthood. And that's because the author is waiting for a restoration of a new temple, and so he's going to highlight that theme as he retells the story. So the author moves into the stories of David here in 1 Chronicles, and there's a lot of overlap with the books of Samuel, David's story there, but there's some really important differences. The author wants to paint David as like a model or a prototype of the coming Messianic king. And so the author leaves out all of the bad stories about David that are in Samuel, the stories about Saul persecuting him, the stories about David and Bathsheba. There's no bad stories about David. It's all good stories portraying him as a hero. And there's more material added that's good about David that was not in the book of Samuel. There's a lot of material in here about how David made preparations for the building of the temple, even though he didn't build it in his own lifetime. So again, the author is painting David in terms of the hope of the coming Messiah who will come and rebuild the temple. And so the story that follows from David then, again, this overlaps with 1 and 2 Kings, chapters 1 through 28 of 2 Chronicles. There's a few differences, though, because the author's concerned only about the line of David. He's going to leave out all of the stories about the northern kingdom of Israel that split off, and he's just going to focus on the line of David. And most of the kings from the line of David, they were unfaithful to Yahweh. They didn't fully obey him. And the author really highlights which kings were obedient and the consequences of their behavior. They were rewarded. God blessed them. And there's repeated themes throughout the story. Obedience is going to lead to God's blessing. But then he highlights in the stories about the kings from David that were disobedient, that it led to times of great trial and suffering for the people of Israel. And so the author shapes this part of the story as kind of like a lesson or an example to his contemporaries as they sit after the exile waiting for the Messiah. So the storyline is trying to encourage the reader that all throughout their history, God has been trying to encourage his people, challenge them to be faithful, to obey, and he'll bring blessings upon them. And so that's kind of the shape of the story of the book of Chronicles. It's like the Cliff Notes version of the Old Testament. It's a retelling, and it's forward pointing. The story is told with an eye to the future, that this story is only going to come to its conclusion when the Messiah comes to rebuild the temple. So that's the shape of the book of Chronicles. I hope that gives you kind of a set of fresh eyes to read it. And after this, we're going to turn the pages into the New Testament, where the Messiah does come onto the scene. And he is going to be concerned about a temple, but not the temple that people were expecting. But I'm getting ahead of myself because that's to move into the book of Matthew. So we'll see you next time. Enjoy the book of Chronicles.